So the achievement gap can be defined as the persistent trend of inequality in the opportunities and measurable educational achievement of subgroups in a society. And when I say measurable educational achievement, measurable is like tests and grades rather than stuff like the guy who drops out of high school and becomes a billionaire. And in the United States, this inequality is often considered to exist between socioeconomic groups and or racial groups. So you might have the rich people or the white people on the top, and then the poor and not so white people at the bottom of the gap. And at first, I had always thought that this gap would more relate to socioeconomic backgrounds rather than racial backgrounds, and any racial trends would just kind of be a coincidence. But then through the readings, I learned that socioeconomic status and racial background and educational underachievement are all more linked than I had previously thought. And then I thought back to my own experience because I was in some of the higher track gifted classes throughout all of my public schooling. And then I think back, in elementary school, I had no African American or Hispanic classmates. It was all white and Asian, and that was a similar trend in junior high and high school. Though in high school it got a little more diverse, but still, I don't remember having any African American classmates in high school at all. So one thing that I think is a big issue with the achievement gap is the access to opportunity, or more so, denial of access to opportunity. For example, when I had to get into those gifted classes, I had to take a test. It was called the CATS test, and I can't find a reliable source of what CATS stands for because, I don't know, I looked and I couldn't find anything. But anyway, I took the CATS test and I passed, and I was in those CATS gifted classes for all of elementary school, easily placed in honors classes in junior high and high school. I didn't even have to test for those honors classes because I was in the high track CATS classes. I could just go in there. And I was never retested, ever, which is a problem because then I got into high school and I was doing some math classes and I realized, hey, I'm not really good at this. But then I knew people who were in the lower track classes, I guess, or just the non-gifted or non-honors classes that probably could have done really well in the classes I was in, but either they didn't have a chance to test, couldn't get transportation to go to the test, didn't have the money to pay for the test, and maybe just couldn't pass the test in the one time that they actually were able to get to do the test. And so they were not offered those classes. If they wanted to get in those classes, they would have to go through all of those hoops and what I call barriers to entry. Barriers to entry are a pain in the neck. Basically, if you want to do something, you gotta wait, you gotta do something else first. And so that means the people who can't overcome those barriers can't get into those better classes or better schools, and that is really frustrating. And I think that, for tracking, it's parents and teachers who think, we want these kids who are doing really well to keep doing really well. And it's kind of that rich get richer mentality. And they think that some of these other students can't handle it, which is kind of a bummer because I think students and their parents should be the ones to decide whether they can or can't handle higher level courses. And for a lot of the lower track courses, as explained in which source was talking about the watered down curriculum, I believe that was the Burris and Wellner source. They were talking about the watered down curriculum, which is basically zone of proximal development below that. So they're not really learning anything, which is kind of a bummer because then they're kind of wasting their time. They learn that school is boring. And I know personally a lot of people who have dropped out of school, and they were the people in those lower track watered down classes. And most of the people I went in class with didn't drop out. Most of those kids are in college. And that same source did say that those lower track courses do harm to the students who are forced to be in there. So my solution is to get rid of tracking altogether and get rid of those barriers to entry. I think if a student wants to do an honors course and goes in it, it should be his own decision whether he's allowed to do that. People say, you can't handle it. Well, maybe he can, and if he can't, then that's a learning experience for himself. Rather than people say, you have to take this test before you can go in there because we just don't have enough confidence in you. So the obstacles to this is, of course, the parents and the teachers who just don't have confidence that some of these students, the poor kids, the non-white students, because those non-white students have overrepresentation in the lower track courses, parents and teachers might think, oh, we can't let them do these courses because they're not good enough. Or at the most extreme, I don't want my high track kids being with those kids, which, that's a mentality that I've heard a few times around my schools and in my personal life. But anyway, I think if we get rid of tracking and we get rid of those barriers to entry for the gifted classes, students who think they're ready for it can go in there and try, and if they're successful, then that's really good. I think having those options is good. I don't think we should get rid of gifted classes altogether, because for the students who are in there, it really does benefit them. But I think that students themselves should be able to choose whether or not they want to get in there, or whether or not they don't want to go in there, more like, because a lot of students that I knew wanted to get into the classes I was in, but they weren't allowed to, because teachers said, oh, you didn't pass this test, you didn't pass this test, or you don't have good enough grades, so you can't get in there. So it really is the rich get richer mentality, because it's what came first. Student does bad in school, or they're placed in bad classes, because they both affect each other in a big cycle of underachievement. So if we get rid of those barriers to entry, students will be able to decide which classes they want to take. That'll be their own decision. And yeah, the biggest obstacle is just that attitude of parents and teachers just not having confidence in students who want to try. Because if we go back to the zone of proximal development, which was Vygotsky's thing, you need to be challenged if you're going to learn. If it's too easy, you're not going to learn anything. So you have to get challenged. So if we're afraid of challenging the kids who are underachieving, how the heck are they supposed to get better?